let's talk. Let's see, lawsuits and legal updates. Go for it.
I like it.
Yeah, right.
I like the music.
Tense.
This segment is our legal and legislative segment where we tell you what you need to know from the courts and from the legislators. Remember, we are not lawyers and nothing we say is legal advice. Our sponsor, John Dillon, is a lawyer who has been helping people fight GVROs. Those are gun violence restraining orders and more. If you know somebody that's had their self-defense rights taken away without due process, give John a call. His website is dillonlawgp.com and his phone number is 760-642-7150.
Okay, so in the past we've talked about a couple of different bills and a couple of different lawsuits. Here's what I've decided I'm not going to do. What I'm not going to do is give a brand new update on something that isn't really decided or there's no immediate action to be taken on it, just because it made it out of committee or something like that. I think that's all great information. There's a lot of great guys that do, give like daily updates and they do a great job, but we're just not really set up to do that. And on our show, it'd become repetitive. But, Guns and Gadgets, Copper Jacket, those guys do a really fantastic job. Mark Smith over on Four Boxes, they do a really fantastic job of like giving up to the minute, like, hey, it just passed out of this committee. Or, hey, this thing was filed, in this lawsuit or whatever. But I do want to bring your attention to a couple of different lawsuits. And if you're ever curious, like, well, hey, what lawsuits are going on? I highly recommend going to Firearms Policy Coalition's website or check out, especially if you're in San Diego or Orange County or Riverside or San Bernardino, go to sdcgo.org/lawsuits. Or if you're in Orange County, go to ocgunowners.com/lawsuits, or Inland Empire, same /lawsuits, and it'll bring up all the lawsuits that we're working on. And of course, we partner with Firearms Policy Coalition on just about everything. They've been absolutely fantastic to us, and it's been a really great relationship. We do slightly different things, but there's a big overlapping circle, and that's lawsuits. There are two lawsuits. I keep hearing about the underlying issue a lot, and I wanted to make everybody aware of the lawsuits if you're not already. The first, of course, is the roster, the handgun, or the quote-unquote safe handgun roster. And there have been major developments in that in the past year or two so that you're starting to be able to purchase firearms that are new. They're starting to be able to make their way onto the roster. Good things are happening. It's going in the right direction. I don't know what the future holds, but I wanted to point out a lawsuit that if you're a San Diego County Gun Owners member, you're a plaintiff on this lawsuit, and it is the Renna versus Bonta lawsuit. Renna, R-E-N-N-A. You can check that out by going to our website and see exactly what's going on there. But basically, it's making the case that, hey, I can't get the firearm I need to in order to protect myself. And the lead plaintiff, Alana Renna, who was a neighbor of mine out in Santee, she went on vacation. She was in Pennsylvania. She went into a gun shop and she found a Smith & Wesson EZ, a Smith & Wesson Shield EZ. And she said, hey, you know what? I have medical issues with my hands. My grip strength isn't the best. Therefore, it's really hard for her to rack the slide. Well, that's exactly what a Smith & Wesson Shield EZ is designed to help with. So she found that, hey, I can actually rack this slide. This is something I could actually use for my self-defense. She came back to California and said, Mike, where do I find one of these guns? And found out that you couldn't buy that here. Well, now it's not just a Second Amendment issue. It's like an ADA issue too, right? Here's somebody who has a disability, but she can't purchase the firearm she needs to defend her life. Well, that's a great lawsuit. So we've been working that lawsuit for years, but again, lawsuits take hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they take the better part of a decade to come to a conclusion. So it's making its way, but the important part to know is that the Renna versus Bonta lawsuit, and there are other lawsuits that accompany it, and they're making their way and they're having a positive effect. There have been additions to the roster thanks to these lawsuits, and again, we don't know what the future is going to hold. I have a feeling that there may be more setbacks in the future, but ultimately we are going to win this thing. But I want you to check out the Renna versus Bonta lawsuit, and let's do our best to get rid of this ridiculous roster. So, what are your thoughts on? I'm sure that the women's group that you run, Girl and a Gun, that the roster is of particular interest to the women in your group.
Yeah, I was going to mention that specifically because it's like, who is the roster really impacting the most? And I think when we look at women wanting to conceal carry, the amount of good concealed carry options that we have here in California are very limited. There's a principle out there where you take it's called the concealment percentage principle, and Tessa Booth kind of popularized this, and it's on the Philster Holsters YouTube channel as well. But Tessa talks about this concept of, hip to hip distance between your hip bones and the ratio of the height of your gun to your hip to hip distance being what makes it easier or difficult to conceal a gun in the appendix position. And so when we take, I've done this with my chapter and lots of shooters, when we take their concealment percentage and we give them an option like a Glock 19, for a lot of girls, that's taking up, 50, 60, 65% of their available concealment space. So when we think about, what guns would be better options for women to conceal, we're looking at things like, slimline Glocks, right? The Glock 43X, the Glock 48. We're looking at, the Shield is okay, but, Shield Plus is a lot better. But we're looking at, Bodyguard, the new Bodyguard 2.0 by Smith & Wesson. That's a really small, fantastic concealable pistol, but it's not on the roster. We can't get it.
And small in the right way.
Right.
Like it's
small
to affect that ratio that you're talking about.
Yes, small in a way that it's easy to conceal, but it's also easy to shoot. And I think so many of the guns that are on the roster that are kind of meeting that small criteria are difficult to shoot, hard, especially for folks who've got hand strength problems, arthritis. The smaller the gun, typically, the more recoil you're going to feel, the harder the trigger press if it's a revolver, right? So you've got all these options out there that are great that you can get in any other state, but you can't get them here. And that really limits the ability for girls to comfortably conceal. And what I see happening a lot in California is that because it's so difficult to find a gun that fits you well, that you can conceal well, you almost, get sucked into this thought that the only way I can carry comfortably is off body. So then you get into the, purse carry.
Which isn't as good.
And not, and it's
in most situations.
Yeah, I would say it's not as good, generally speaking. And also, it's not necessary. If you could get a Bodyguard 2.0, or if you could get a, slimline Glock option, I think you could conceal on body just fine, even if you are a slimmer framed person. I carry a SIG 365 XL that I got used, but those are difficult to find. Yeah. Now we do have the SIG Rose as an option, but it's got a comp on it. It's not quite the same as far as concealable. But I think the roster is very pointedly affecting women and female shooters, female concealed carriers, more than it is probably anyone else who's got more options as far as size goes.
Well, and it's certainly not affecting criminals.
No.
They don't care if they have a Gen 3 Glock or a Gen 5 Glock. Right. They're just going to, criminals are just going to do criminal stuff. Sam, what's it like living? Now, you live in a state, you've actually worked at a gun shop in a state where they, somewhat respect your freedom. Imagine if, I don't know, like if you walk into a gun shop where you're at, or the gun shop that you used to work at, and they said, okay, starting tomorrow, 80% of the pistols that you sell, you can no longer sell. First off, do you think that 80% number is probably accurate? And second off, what would that do to your customers? What would that, how would your state react to that level of discrimination?
The Commonwealth of Virginia is pretty interesting because it is almost perfectly evenly split between red voters and blue voters. So it's pretty much decided entirely by a very slim margin whenever there's a state level election. But I can tell you that anecdotally, we sold a crap ton of Glock 48s and to a little bit lesser extent 43Xs and P365 family pistols to women because that, and it's not like I'm not one of those people who walks into a gun store with my thumbs in my belt going, what's a good gun for a woman? It's, whatever fits you, whatever works for you. But women tend
Good
to be
answer.
built a little bit differently from men, and their hands tend to be dimensionally different. And so 48s work really well for them. For older women who, especially ones who have arthritis or other grip strength issues, the Smith & Wesson EZ, like we could barely keep those in stock. We would get them a dozen at a time and then blow out of them, before I even had a chance to turn around. So it's ridiculous to have this roster. It's unfair. I know the point of the roster, the way it's built, is as a way to ensure that all handguns sold in California are safe. But I see no evidence. Yeah, that's what they say. But I see no evidence that almost any of the pistols that are not on the roster that are commonly available throughout the United States are unsafe. I will say that there are some handguns on the roster which I think, in my personal professional opinion, are unsafe.
Yes.
But that's a different discussion.
Yeah,
it's
and
like,
that's kind of the point, is that if 80% of the guns in the gun shops that you frequent and worked at, 80% of them are considered unsafe by the state of California.
Yeah.
Yet you're seeing no problems. And then you could actually point to some of the pistols that are still on the roster, that can't be replaced by newer versions or more modern, upgrades or whatever.
Safer options.
I mean, I think that's exactly the point. You're exactly right. You're making the exact point. But anyway, so so I guess, if you value getting rid of this roster, support the organizations that file these lawsuits. Support San Diego County Gun Owners, support Firearms Policy Coalition, support CGF. They're all on there. Second Amendment Foundation's on there as well. Everybody's doing a good job trying to get rid of these rosters. And of course, as Sam and everybody were here pointing out, is the results aren't less crime. The results are that women have fewer options to defend themselves. The results are that there was a government-made black market, and nobody was safer for it. So I wanted to bring that up. Hey, thanks for watching Gun Owners Radio. I hope you loved that clip. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and follow us on social media. And check out our website at gunownersradio.com.